Hello, everyone. Welcome to another special episode of Radio Offside. We have a wonderful guest with us today again. Joining me today is Matt Slater. He is a reporter for The Athletic, and I have to admit, he's my favorite reporter on the platform. Matt, welcome to our podcast. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Well, that's lovely. Very kind words. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate your work. It's really different from the main body of the works there because most people are focused on a club or on a league, but then you're integrating that investigative part of journalism into football, which I find really interesting. And
Well, that's the idea. Yeah, I mean, trying to talk about the money behind the game and how it's run, how it's governed, the kind of bits in between the games. Really, that's how I often think about it.
mhm. And just a personal question, what made you become interested in this field and how did you end up in this stream?
Oh, that's a good question. Uh, yeah, it's one of those things. Sometimes you get into these things by accident, don't you? But I have always been interested in sort of why teams win. I haven't always been a football journalist. In fact, this is probably the first time I've only really covered football. Prior to that, I covered all sports. And I, when I was starting out as a journalist, I spent some time as a business journalist.
Mm-hmm.
And I did some work in Brussels, in Belgium, doing kind of competition and businessy news there, and then came back to London and did some more of that. So I suppose I've always been, whilst I'm not particularly good at math, I've always been comfortable with reporting on money and business. I sort of understand the terminology. And then, I quite like news, sort of hard news, rows, disputes. And that kind of attracted me to things like doping stories in cycling and athletics, or the scandal at FIFA, or football takeovers. Stories that perhaps kind of traditional sports journalists might shy away from a little bit because they sort of felt, well, is that sport? Should that really be done by a news journalist or a business journalist? I just sort of thought, well, do you know what? They're not going to do it as well as someone that understands sport. It's sort of halfway between the two. So there's an opportunity for me. And I think during my career, as sport, as an industry, as a sector, if you like, of a country's economy has just grown in profile and in importance. There are more of me who are interested in this sort of thing, and there's more need for us as well, because we have to hold these people to account. We have to make sure that the people that run the sports that we love, are doing so well, and sport has the best systems and practices possible to avoid, I don't know, clubs going bankrupt or great big scandals. So that's really it. It's just sort of old-fashioned journalism that I felt there was a bit of a gap. It was something that I thought I could do, that I was interested in, and it's just sort of developed really. But I'm not alone. I mean, as I say, there's a sort of a kind of growth industry of sports news hybrid type journalists who they either were like business journalists who love sport, or sports journalists who were comfortable talking about business. But that's kind of where we've met in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not only that, the role that journalism plays in making sure that everyone knows that whatever they do is being observed so that they will not do things that they shouldn't. But it also brings up very attractive stories for the readers too. So I think in that sense, it's really important for the field to develop too. And so with that, I'd like to start off with my first question. You recently had an article with the title for the article in The Athletic was "Are Big Clubs Too Big?" So my first question is that, are they becoming too big, the big clubs? And what are the consequences of that phenomenon if it's happening?
Well, I mean, uh, are the big clubs too big? Well, that's a matter of opinion, isn't it? It's up to you whether you think they're too big or not. The piece was premised on the idea that there is a group of elite clubs in Europe, and they are the elite clubs in all their own domestic leagues, and they come from the big five European leagues, and that's England, Italy, France, Germany, and Spain. Those five leagues have moved away from the other leagues in terms of their turnover, their income, and the best clubs within those leagues have moved away from the other leagues in their domestic leagues too. Now, you could argue this has always been the case, that there's always been bigger clubs in each league. There's always been famous clubs, and that is true. There is nothing new about that. What has happened is kind of a combination of Champions League money, the amount of money that the Uefa competitions are now generating, and access to the Champions League in particular is really important. That has been almost like rocket fuel, and it has given these clubs enormous advantages at home, which then means they can just keep qualifying for the Champions League. So therefore, you get that kind of compounding effect of perennial Champions League involvement equaling, a great big wedge of cash that the other teams in your domestic league don't get. The popularity of the Champions League around the world has helped. It's brought them to screens from Bangkok to wherever. It's all over the place, which helps with global sponsors, which brings in more money, and therefore they're more attractive to the best players. So there is a sort of virtuous circle there. And I think just kind of there's a bigger point about where we are with our economies in terms of capitalist countries, that the greatest riches tend to go to the kind of market leaders in each market and sector. So that could be books or music or whatever, right? Brands, and that's increasingly how these clubs are viewed. They are big brands in the live entertainment sector. So we have seen a something that's always there. The big clubs, medium clubs, smaller clubs become even more obvious and clearly defined, and those bigger clubs have moved away. There is genuine blue water between them, and that's often sort of seen in these rich lists that are done every year, where you work out who are the top 20 income generators, or spend the most money on wages, or the most money on transfers. It's the same clubs. It's the same clubs every year, and the gaps are growing. There are even gaps within those top 20s or top 30s. But the key point is that those clubs that are always there are moving away, and this shouldn't surprise anybody, because I think anyone that follows European football will recognise this. They're winning more. They're winning more at home. They're winning more in Europe. Now, this year is perhaps a bit different. We've sort of seen some different teams. We've seen more upsets this year. I wonder if that's just one of those things that comes around, or if it's to do with lockdown, or what. We don't know, right? But it's too early to tell if it's going to be end this trend. It's just an anomaly. We will see. Inter could win, and Bayern could win, and it will all look the same, because they're teams that have won before. But if you look at the number of teams that were winning the Champions League, let's say 20, 30, 40 years ago, there are fewer teams winning now. It's being shared among a smaller group, and the same thing is happening in almost every domestic league in Europe. Less different winners than there were in the 70s, 80s, 90s. So there are kind of various things to sort of pick out there. There is this definite measurable effect where the big clubs are getting richer, and then there is this sort of other effect that you can look at, that the competitive balance has changed, and we are seeing fewer different winners. Now, the great comparison that people make, the obvious comparison people make between European football and North American sport, where you have engineered competitive balance, you have hard salary caps, you have draft systems to evenly distribute talent around the league, and crucially, you don't have promotion or relegation. You have closed leagues where not only are there hard caps, there are hard ceilings, and it is a genuine profit sharing arrangement between management and players, and everyone is supposed to make money. Okay, that's one of the sort of key things that underpins the American sports model. No relegation, we're okay. If we have a terrible team, it's okay. We can rebuild through the draft. As long as we get that right, we can be competitive again. There is nothing like that in European football. We have promotion, so teams that get it right, that want to invest, can organically climb up through the ranks, and we have all those sort of fairy tale stories, and we have cup competitions, and we have cross-border competitions, but we equally have relegation. That kind of existential, oh no, what's happened to my business? It can go. So there are huge differences between the two systems, but if it's dynasties you want, I would suggest European football is better suited to delivering dynasties. If it is competitive balance you want, I would argue that the North American model is better.
And I was talking to a friend of mine who's a team member in our podcast about the US model, and we were saying that, interestingly, the only thing that's not capitalistic in the US, it's their sports model. It's more lenient on socialistic views. Is
socialism for billionaires, though.
Yeah, you're right. Yes, they'll just make sure that they keep making their money. And so you talked about the competitiveness issue. First of all, do you think with this, I think the model that the European football is focused on will eventually, in the long run, jeopardize the competitiveness. Do you think that will be the case too? And if yes, what would be some of the ways out? Can the US model work in European football, or are there any other suggestions or solutions that you think would work?
Well, there are a few things there. So, the first thing is probably to say that the competitive balance, and as for the reasons I said in my last answer, you can measure it. It has diminished. There are fewer winners, and you can look at almost any competition. There are a few exceptions, but that's the case. You can do it sort of on individual games. It's much more easy to predict now than it used to be, because the bigger, richer teams just have better resources, have better players. It's as simple as that. Now, the question, though, really is to ask, is that a problem? Right? So you would imagine there's this idea that we love sport because it's unscripted drama. We don't know what's going to happen. But we do know what's going to happen most of the time, right? If Liverpool are playing Norwich, we think that Liverpool are going to win most of the times. Now, one of the things that I think that let's say the Premier League has got right, and the Premier League's got right, but it can still happen. As I said, it might be happening in European competitions this year. Is there are still just enough upsets. Whilst you might sit down to watch Liverpool versus Norwich, thinking that Liverpool are going to win, they don't win every time. Norwich beat Manchester City. There are still enough upsets. So, last year's European competitions, Liverpool came back from 3-0 down to beat Barca. And I'm seeing other surprises as well. Ajax beat Juventus, didn't they? I think in the was it Juventus in the round before? I can't remember. But anyway, there are just enough surprises and upsets to keep us guessing. Leicester City, of course, won the Premier League. Montpellier won the French league. You can sit down thinking you know what's going to happen, and then not being surprised when that happens. But there are still just enough. There's just enough excitement and thrills and upsets to keep us guessing. And then I think the second thing is well, okay, if things aren't getting more predictable, Are we turning off? Well,
Mm-hmm.
the evidence is we're not. The evidence is that we appear to be quite comfortable with the status quo, and that fans these days don't mind sitting down to watch big team play little team and thinking that big team are going to win, because TV revenues are good. In terms of people going to the games, attendances are good, sponsors are interested. Look, we're talking at a time when it's all a bit weird because of COVID, and you have to sort of almost park that for a bit. But going into lockdown, um, the Premier League in particular, its revenues and its popularity around the globe was robust. Um, so there's this idea that we should be alarmed about the concentration of power, the polarization between good teams and bad teams, but we're not seeing the evidence of the problem yet. Now, that could just be because we haven't got there yet, and it will be a problem. We're just not there yet, and I think that is where the game's leadership, game's bosses have to earn their money, have to always be thinking like CEOs. What's the problem around the corner? So I think that's the first thing to say, and then could and should European football be borrowing ideas from the North American model? Well, I mean, everything I've said so far is basically based in fact and evidence. I mean, this is where it does come down to opinion. Um, I would argue, and I like both. I follow sports on both sides of the Atlantic. That I like their model for their sports, and I like their competitions. I like our model for our sports, and I like our competitions, and I like my teams in our competitions. Promotion and relegation is fundamental and inherent to our systems. We've been playing with these leagues for over a century. Um, if I'm just going to talk about my country, what have we got? What is our USB? What is special about British, English, Scottish football? It is the number of teams we have. It is that close attachment with local communities. It is the depth and size of our pyramid. The fact that people go to watch teams in the 8th, 9th tier. The fact that we have now 5 tiers of professional clubs in my country. That we just have an incredible appetite for going to watch and talk and discuss football. And we want our clubs to have the right and the ability to climb the pyramid, that dream. And we have cup competitions that reflect that. And then we go into European competitions, and we want the idea of an Atalanta that could defeat the odds. We love those stories. So closing those off with closed leagues and an American model will be hard. And then the tricky bit is the temptation. And this is where I worry where we're sort of at now is, do we sort of start taking bits of the American system and trying them? Well, I think the American system works so well because they all work in concert. All those ideas, all the things I listed: hard caps, draft systems that distribute talent, closed leagues, genuine profit sharing. I think if you start trying to take one or two bits of those off the shelf, you're going to find that they don't work that well unless you bring them all over. And then I just come back to what I've just said. Does the North American model, is it right for everything? Well, it's right for running, I don't know, a sort of 30-team franchise model for American football in North America or basketball, whatever it might be. Which, but let's be honest, those leagues are effectively world leagues, aren't they? That's where the best players all go. That's not the case with European football. Every country has a league that they really care about. The Premier League might think it's the best league, but it's not going to tell Spain and Germany and Italy, by the way, this is the world league now. And okay, I suspect you're going to ask me about a Super League, but let's see. People have been talking about that for as long as I've been alive. It hasn't happened yet. People talk about gradual and incremental moves towards that, and that's possibly the case. And the Champions League would be a really good example of that. But I do think we have room on the globe for the way North America does its sports and the way the rest of the world, particularly Europe, does its favourite sports. And I would suggest things are working pretty well at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And so that brought a couple of questions in my mind. First off, it's so you mentioned that just bringing bits and pieces of the model in the US or the North American model would not be that helpful if you just bring just one bit of it and then try to implement it. I guess FFP was one thing that did not work. And then the other thing is that recently, or maybe it worked, we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
But I want to get to the salary cap, that the rule for salary cap that EFL has put into place. What are the details on that? And do you think that will work eventually? Help
Well,
the teams?
so you raise a really good example. So when I say I don't think it works if you just bring sort of one regulatory tool over, I meant it doesn't work if you think it's going to achieve everything at once. So if you bring any kind of cost control, any kind of wage control, be it a hard or soft salary cap, and expect it to make all your businesses more sustainable and less vulnerable to insolvency or bankruptcy, and to increase competition, you might be disappointed, because it's very hard for just one for a cap to do both. And we actually have had caps in European sport and British sport for a while, and rugby is a really good example. Both rugby league and rugby union, the two codes of rugby we have caps, have hard caps. Rugby union is probably the best example. We've got 20 years of evidence there. But they tend to do one or the other. They tend to make businesses more robust and less prone to failure, so owners like them, or they can shake everything up and really level the playing field. And I think you just have to be quite clear in what you're trying to achieve when you bring in a cap, hard or soft cap. So if we turn to football, European football's governing body UEFA a decade or so ago looked at the state of European football, and every country had a few of these stories, and was alarmed at the amount of debt, alarmed at the amount of money that was owed to tax authorities, and alarmed at the number of clubs that were going bankrupt or very nearly bankrupt. And it just looks a bit of a mess. You just thought, well, here's an industry that is massively overspending. So UEFA decided to do what it thought it could do, and it brought in a soft cap, financial fair play, and we've all been talking about that for a decade. And that was a wage control tied to your turnover, so that's the soft element of it. So you were still saying to bigger clubs that could generate more money, you can spend more on wages than a smaller club, as long as it is relative to your income. So the idea being that you are within your means, you're spending within your means, you're kind of breaking even. And various leagues around Europe have kind of taken that on board and copied it. The Premier League is one. And I would argue, and many economists and kind of football finance experts that I speak to would argue that has been successful in making European football more sustainable. The amount of debt in the game has gone down, the number of business failures have gone down, and it on that measure, if that's what you were trying to achieve, it has largely worked. It's not perfect. We still have clubs getting into financial fair play difficulties, and as I said, we're going through a really weird spell with COVID, and we'll have to see how this plays out. But by and large, it has worked. Where it hasn't worked, and where it has failed, and it depends on who you talk to as to what it was trying to achieve in the first place, is it hasn't made things any more competitive, has it? It has arguably entrenched those positions that I mentioned in my first answer. It has helped the elite become more elite. It's pulled up the drawbridge. It said to emerging challenger clubs, well, it shackled them. It said, you are going to be tied to how much money you can generate yourselves. So we're going to make it really hard for someone wealthy to come in and invest in you to close that gap. So that has been one of the main complaints about financial fair play, and one of its sort of weaknesses. Now, sort of fast forwarding a bit to what we've been talking about in English football, particularly outside of the Premier League, where most of the clubs are all earning so much money, they really shouldn't be worried about business failure. They have guaranteed checks given to them, TV money that really should prevent them getting into any kind of difficulty. Where the challenges are in English football is further down, second, third, fourth tier, and so on. And even before COVID, a lot of those clubs were sailing too close to the wind. And we had a bad year last year where we lost a club, a historic club, Bury. It was the first one to basically go out of the league for 30 years, best part of 30 years. And we very nearly lost another, one that had actually recently been in the Premier League, Bolton. So that was a real shock to the system. I think people had got a little bit complacent. I think they had assumed that those soft salary caps were working and that people were being more sensible. Well, no. I mean, there's an element of human nature there, and I think complacency had crept in. So that was a shock. And then you add the shock that we're all going through with COVID. We get to, right, we need to do more. We need something better, more teeth, more robust, easier to enforce. And we've gone with a hard cap. So that's the sort of breaking news from the third and fourth tier of English football, League One and League Two. They've voted in hard salary caps, 1.5 million. This is just only applies to your first team squad, and they are for 22-man squads. Goes to 20-man squads the following season. So you have 1.5 million to spend on wages, taxes, bonuses, agents' fees in League Two, and you have £2.5 million to spend on your 22-man squad in League One. Now, if I've written a big story about this. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you basically just divide. Say we're talking about League One. You divide 2.5 million by 22 to work out an average of what you have to spend on a player. Under 21-year-old players are exempt, so you could, they don't count for the cap. So you could maybe run with a team of 17 over 21s and fill the rest with 5 under 21s who would nearly always be cheaper. And there are various transitional arrangements. So if you have players on pre-existing contracts who are being paid a lot more for the purposes of the cap, certainly this year and next year, they only count as divisional averages, which is a big help. So let's say you're paying someone, I don't know, £400,000 a year. For the purposes of this season, they'll count as £200,000 a year because that's the average. Likewise for teams that are relegated. So if you are coming down from a league above, you would have a bigger wage bill, wouldn't you? So you just get to count all your players as an average. But look, there's still choice there. If you want to spend, it's a bit like fantasy football. If you want to spend, a lot of your cap on a striker, a great goalie, a couple of good midfielders, a centre back, well, okay, you've built the spine of a team there. You've spent a lot of money on 6 players. You're going to have to make do with the rest of your money because you now have a hard fixed number. And then if you spend over that cap, it's a bit like the luxury tax that we see in North American sports. You can spend up to over 5% over the cap, but you will be paying £1 into a pot that is shared between all the other teams for every pound that you spend extra on your players. And if you go over 5%, you'll be facing a charge. And you could well then be looking at fines and/or points penalties, points deductions. So that's it. So there is a sort of run over element, and then there is a, well, hold on, if you go beyond 5%, then you are in trouble. Okay. So that's what we're looking at. It's been voted through quite easily in League Two, the fourth tier, where the clubs will probably be thinking 1.5 million. That's fine. That's kind of what most of us spend anyway. This is good. We don't make any money down here. League One, it was a really, really close vote. You needed 2/3 of the clubs to approve it, and exactly 2/3 approved it, which means there's 1/3 disappointed, and those 1/3 are the bigger clubs in that division. They are clubs like Sunderland and Portsmouth that have been in the Premier League and would love to get back there. And then we haven't had a vote yet in the Championship. So the Championship's our second tier. We're waiting for a vote there. Now that's the one that will be really interesting because you've got a real mix there of clubs that have just dropped down from the Premier League, clubs that want to go back to the Premier League very, very quickly. You've got some clubs with some very, very, very wealthy owners there. You've got some big clubs. You've got a real range of big clubs there. And then you've got some very small clubs who'll be thinking, great, level the playing field, help me not lose as much money. So that's the situation. It's developing. It is causing controversy. Controversy might be too strong. It's causing a wide and loud debate about why we're doing this. What are we trying to achieve? Is this a temporary measure? Is this about sustainability, or is it about level playing fields? Is this the best way? What was wrong with the soft salary cap? These are the issues. And then, of course, the players' unions, as you would imagine, just as they would in the States or anywhere else, are saying, why are you limiting the ability of my members to earn money? This is communism. We don't do that. Why are we having limits on what we can earn? You wouldn't accept that. I wouldn't accept that. So these are the debates.
And yeah, and your piece, you mentioned that they have not been delegated to about the rule as well. Like, nobody has talked to them from the officials. That one is weird too.
Yeah, that's interesting. So they're actually talking now.
Okay.
They are talking
after
now.
They passed it.
Well, after they passed, in as I say, League One and League Two. I think there's a couple of things to say there. There was a sense that they had to get on with it and do it quickly because of COVID, and talking to the union would have slowed things down, which is true. And also, what was the point of speaking to the union when we knew what they were going to say, which was no, or at best, okay, show us some evidence of economic hardship then, which I think is a reasonable question. However, what's evidence? Is it a club going bankrupt? Is that what it would take? So the club owners said, well, we're not going to wait for one of us to go bankrupt
and then
for you to agree that we need to do this. We're going to do this, and then maybe we'll have a conversation about it afterwards. So they've done it the other way around. We're having a conversation now. In the meantime, the union have told the English Football League that they want to go to arbitration about it. So it's not over. And one or two clubs who are opposed to the idea are considering legal action, they're watching what's happening with the union, and they're thinking, well, do we have a legal case here? Could we get an injunction maybe to stop it? Is it enforceable? Is it legally enforceable? And that hasn't been challenged yet. So a vote's happened. It was close in one of the divisions. The bigger teams are upset. Everyone is kind of working towards it now. But I think it'll be interesting if someone breaks the cap, busts the cap, and then tries to challenge it. Say, well, was it enforceable? Was it ever enforceable? Okay.
And so back to FFP, I've just got one more question, and I think then from here we'll just move on to another topic. So you made a great distinction between how it has been good in terms of financial balance, but when it comes to competitive balance, we don't know, and it has not been helpful. But so my question is that has it been helpful for smaller clubs in top leagues as well in terms of financial balance, or is it only just the top clubs?
I don't think it's if you're trying to no, it really hasn't. I mean, what's happened in Champions League, where we've seen Real, Barca, Liverpool, the biggest, richest teams from the biggest, richest leagues do well. So last season was a real watershed where all 16 of the teams to make the knockout stages were from the big five leagues. And I can't remember off the top of my head, was it the same this year, or did one Portuguese team make it? I can't remember.
I think, but last year, didn't Ajax make it to?
Oh, sorry, no, you're right.
Yeah.
Ajax were the exception. It was this year, wasn't it? All 16. This year was the 16. All top five. So we and that is a trend. You can see that over time, the big five leagues that I mentioned before are dominating the knockout stages, and then within each league. So we in England talk about a big six, and it is the teams that keep qualifying for Europe every year, and it's the two Manchester clubs, Liverpool. Everton used to be in it. Sorry, Arsenal, Spurs, and Chelsea. So the three London clubs, two Manchester clubs, and Liverpool. Now that's changed since I was a kid, when it was Liverpool, Everton, Manchester United, and Arsenal were sort of the bigger clubs, and then Spurs would have been the next one. Manchester City and Chelsea are the ones that have sort of come up, and both of those have come up for reasons that we all know, that we've discussed. You know, Chelsea were bought by an oligarch, Roman Abramovich, and kind of gate crashed the party, and Manchester City were bought by basically Abu Dhabi. And Everton unfortunately drifted the other way. You know, they were always sort of hanging on a bit. So, you know, the big four, big five-ish has become a big six, and some of the numbers have changed. But for the last decade, certainly in England, that big six has looked pretty solid. And there is, as I said, a gap between the amount they earn and what anyone else earns. They also do well in cup competitions. You know, their average finishing position. There's a very clearly discernible performance gap as well. Now that doesn't mean though that upsets are impossible. And I did mention the Leicester City story, and the Leicester City story is almost taken on a kind of life of its own. It's become this sort of justification for almost everything. You know, no, there's nothing wrong with the status quo. Look, Leicester City, whatever it was, 500 to 1. You know, you can do it, and then that's true. You know, a more cynical person or people have sort of said, well, look, hold on, that was a strange year, and they've worked out why Leicester City. They got lucky with injuries. They had a great group. They're also owned by a very wealthy Thai family. You know, they're not paupers. They had an awful lot of money poured in to kind of close that gap. As soon as they won, they lost a couple of their best players straight away like that. You know, Riyad Mahrez goes and N'Golo Kante goes. They couldn't, they win the title and then they found it hard to hold on to their best players. Which, again, we've seen with other teams that have kind of upset the natural order. Ajax get a good team together. What's the first thing that happens when they achieve something? Well, they lose their 2 or 3 best players. So, and I wonder what will happen with Atalanta. And there's a pattern. So, FFP has I think made it hard for the group that are sometimes called challenger clubs. You know, that are trying to join that top table, trying to join that party. The last couple to make it, to jump across just as FFP were coming in was PSG and Man City, both of whom bought by Gulf states and had huge, almost unprecedented, or Chelsea would be the other one, huge injections of money rapidly and close the gap fast before the FFP door slammed shut. Now, that's one of the great stories of the last decade, isn't it? Whether they did get in before the door shut or not. And we've been arguing about that, both with PSG and Man City having financial fair play problems. Mm-hmm. But, they are now successful. They're earning money. Manchester City now have diluted some of their ownership anyway. So there's a minority American owner there. There's a Chinese investor. They're buying clubs around the world, and they're generating a lot of their money. So, what happened 10 years ago happened 10 years ago, and we can debate it forever and ever and ever. But they are now FFP compliant.
Okay, talking about these big takeovers from the Persian Gulf states, I wanted to talk about the Saudi takeover of Newcastle. So the Premier League, they sent out a statement or letter, I think it was last week, if I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to talk about the details of the letter and what happened, and the ongoing saga of whether they're coming, they're not coming. Everyone was ready for them to come in, and then all of a sudden they were the ones who pulled out of the deal. And what are your thoughts about the letter that was sent out, and what are your thoughts about the future of the deal? Will it happen or not?
Wow, you're right when you call it a saga. It's been a huge story here for months, a complicated one, a tricky one to follow, and I've been covering takeovers of football clubs for years now, and I've never really seen one quite like this before. Just to do with the personalities involved, what was at stake, the issues. It's really complicated. I'll try and do it as fast as I can. So the letter was from the chief executive of the Premier League, a guy called Richard Masters, to a local MP, to a local politician from Newcastle. It was a reply to a letter she'd sent where she was expressing the anger and the questions that she's getting from her constituents, from the people of Newcastle. And it was effectively an open letter. Masters would have said to her, of course you can publish it. I'm answering your questions. And anyway, subsequently, as in this week, he's actually met a group of Newcastle United fans, their supporters trust, a sort of fans group. And likewise, he answered their questions and he agreed with them that they could publish the Q&A, his answers, in an agreed minutes of the meeting. So now we've had sort of kind of two responses from the Premier League to what happened. Now, this is interesting because we hadn't had that before. And this has been going on for months, and people have been getting very frustrated. Newcastle United fans are getting very frustrated about what was going on with this takeover. So to explain the takeover, Newcastle United, Premier League club, very well supported, famous, great history, haven't had much success in recent years. But still a pretty established team, and big. They get great gates, great attendances. They've been owned for the last, I think it's 13, 14 years by quite a famous businessman in this country. He's a retailer. He owns lots of shops. Lives in Miami now these days. A guy called Mike Ashley. And he's an interesting character. He's a bit controversial here. I mean, he's trying to think of a good American equivalent. I can't at the moment. He's a sort of very dashing businessman in that he makes quick decisions and does well at selling clothes and shops, but is quite an abrasive character. Ruffles feathers, as we say here. Kind of makes enemies. Got into football, started well, thought he could sort of do it better than others. No, it hasn't worked at all. Relations have soured very badly. He's made mistakes. And I think he just wants out. He's wanted out for a while. I think he's lost interest in football and Newcastle United in particular. So they've been for sale. They've been for sale for a long time. But the thing about Ashley is he's a businessman. Just because he's given up on something doesn't mean he's going to give it away. He has a price in his head. That business, I've run that business for a while. It's in reasonable shape, as he would say, because he's thinking of it in numbers, not titles. I've got a number. I'm not selling it unless someone meets my number. So we've had this sort of Newcastle United, as I say, have been for sale for a while. People have got close, and that has created more and more of this frustration. So this desperation to sell and get rid of him, move on, just change the scenery there. Which brings us to this year, when I think it was January or February, the Wall Street Journal comes out with an absolute blockbuster story. Saudi Arabia, their sovereign wealth fund, wants to buy Newcastle United with someone who had previously been linked with Newcastle United, a woman called Amanda Staveley. She's a British businesswoman who is a sort of networker, a broker, been based out in the Gulf for a while, is perceived to be good at kind of bringing big Middle East money into deals for big trophy assets. And she's been trying to buy a football club for a while, Liverpool, Newcastle before, but this was different because previously it was like, well, did she have the money? Now it was like, oh right, she's definitely got the money. The money's not going to be a problem. It's the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. They've got the money, and they have been buying, you name it, all sorts, bits of Uber and SoftBank, and investing in big sporting events, and they want to build new cities in the desert, and to diversify Saudi Arabia's economy. The same story we've seen with Qatar and UAE and et cetera, et cetera. So that's an old tale. But so Saudi Arabia are going to buy Newcastle. Bit of a problem. For the last 3 years, Saudi Arabia's been in a massive dispute row with Qatar, as have other countries in that area. As I don't need to tell you about that. It's an interesting part of the world, and they've fallen out. And as part of that row, Saudi Arabia, and this, there's depending on who you talk to, and which side you're on, appear to have sort of gone after Qatari businesses as well. You know, they went for they went after the currency. They closed the borders. They've denied them airspace. And they, one of the things that Qatar has is you know, it's made a lot of noise, and it's raised its profile with Al Jazeera. Mm-hmm. And it's big TV company, and then an offshoot of Al Jazeera called beIN Sport, which is just a big sports broadcaster, and they've invested loads of money in American sports rights, British sports rights, European sports rights, you name it, all the premium sports content in the Middle East and North Africa region, which goes all the way from Morocco to Oman. beIN is your provider. If you care about premium sport, you're a beIN, and you can afford it, you're a beIN Sport subscriber. That's where you're watching the best stuff, Champions League and NFL and Premier League. So that's been going on for a while, about a decade. Saudi Arabia, the minute they fall out with Qatar, a pirate station called Be Out Q. So you've got beIN Sports from Qatar. So a pirate operator called Be Out Q it pops up in Saudi Arabia. And cut long story short, for the last 3 years has been stealing content and transmitting it to Saudi Arabia. They stole beIN set-top boxes and rebadged them. They were broadcasting it via the Arabsat satellite for a while until that was shut down. Now it's just done through IPTV, through internet. And they banned beIN, and they've now officially shut beIN down and fined them for sort of trumped up charges, or certainly not charges that would warrant usually a company being banned. They've certainly prevented beIN from operating in Saudi Arabia, which is one of the biggest market in the Gulf, and this has caused just an almighty row. The Premier League has been right in the middle of it for 3 years, long before Newcastle. The idea of Newcastle came along. The Premier League's really strong on piracy. They always back their broadcasters. It's one of the reasons why the Premier League's done so well. So the Premier League has been arguing and asking Saudi Arabia to stop pirating its content and to shut BLQ down, take this seriously. There have been WTO reports, the Department of Trade in the US, the EU. They've all moaned at Saudi Arabia. FIFA, Uefa, Bundesliga. They've all said, stop it. Just stop it. This row with Qatar, stop it. Or at least stop stealing our stuff. Okay. Right. So that's been going on in the background. We get to Newcastle. So now, public investment fund, sovereign wealth fund of Saudi Arabia, run by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The board, they're nearly all ministers of state and from the royal court. Now wants to buy a Premier League football club. The Premier League to say to them, well, okay, but you've been stealing our stuff for 3 years. If you want to buy one of our clubs, you've kind of got to pass our rule book. And we think the Saudi state would be a shadow director, would have influence over the club. So therefore, we're asking the Saudi government, what's going on with the piracy? Are you going to unban beIN? Are you going to compensate them for the last few years? Are you going to absolutely promise not to do this again? Are you going to really shut down BLQ and all other piracy there? Are you just going to kind of respect international law? And that, I think we've all hoped, or people like me who've been watching this from the sidelines thinking, well, look, there is a way out of this. There's a compromise. Or Saudi Arabia have just got to meet the Premier League halfway, or at least on some of those, most of the way on those things, and they get its club. Newcastle United get a new owner. The Premier League gets a new potential club on the up. More excitement, more competitive balance. And maybe Saudi Arabia will then try and legally bid for rights. They'll compete with beIN legally, driving the price up. And everyone thought, well, this is great, right? Saudi Arabia become serious on piracy. Newcastle get better. Newcastle fans are happy.
Everyone wins.
What happens? What actually happens? Nothing. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. Saudi Arabia double down. refused to budge on piracy, or certainly kind of admitting it, or acknowledging what the Premier League are asking for, and it gets stuck. The deal gets stuck. The takeover gets stuck. No one says anything for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and then PIF, the Public Investment Fund, walk away, and that's where we're at. That's the story. They wouldn't budge on piracy, or they wouldn't answer the Premier League's questions, and they've walked away.
And so how serious are they? Is there, like, are they thinking of maybe not making the deal go through PIF, like have a third party person but still be funded by them? Are they thinking of coming back to the table?
You're asking good questions. No one knows.
No
I mean, the problem is, if you've spent 4 months doing one thing and banging heads with someone, to then sort of come back and try and do something a little bit different, isn't it a bit obvious?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you immediately go, well, hold on a minute, you were talking to me a few weeks ago, and now someone else is coming at me with pretty much the same idea? It's not going to work. If they think they're going to sort of try and redirect public investment funds, Saudi sovereign wealth fund money via a third party or an individual, it's going to be really hard now, because everyone will see it coming, and it doesn't fundamentally change the main issue, which is the piracy, the protection of intellectual property. So I can't see a way for a Saudi-backed deal like this to get through until the piracy is dealt with.
Okay, I see. And so one last question, my final question. I'm gonna move towards your Twitter rather than athletic material.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
So, it sounds so okay. I'm just gonna spell it out. So about FIFA's president, how have you seen his term in terms of the goals that he promised, or the things that he promised he'll do, and what he has done? And how serious is the prosecution? Is it a prosecution or the investigation that is going on?
Okay.
The Swiss court.
We'll deal with that one first. It's hard to say from where I'm sat how serious it is. It's not good, is it? It's embarrassing for sure. FIFA, or what I can say is that FIFA are upset, annoyed, surprised. They have unequivocally backed their boss. He's refused to resign even temporarily while this is sorted out. It's all very complicated. It's to do with a series of meetings he had with the kind of chief prosecutor in Switzerland, and whether that was appropriate at a time when FIFA were being investigated, as FIFA have been investigated by lots of different jurisdictions, the US as well, ever for the last 4 or 5 years over the various FIFA corruption angles. Should Infantino, who of course is based in Switzerland, FIFA are based in Switzerland, should he, as the boss of FIFA, had friendly chats with the office of the person who would be investigating FIFA? And you speak to FIFA, their lawyers, they are, what's wrong here? There's no, we haven't been charged for anything. This is what you'd expect. These were attempts to sort of provide information, clear things up. Why wouldn't FIFA seek to provide information to the Swiss authorities? And they are sort of coming at this from a real shock that this has happened. But it has happened, and the chief prosecutor has stood down, is under investigation now by his successor. Was that appropriate? Was that the right thing to do? No one's been charged yet. No one really understands. I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't got a full handle on what those charges would be. It would be sort of, kind of abuse of office, abuse of procedure. But it kind of ties into your first half of your question. What is really going on at FIFA? Has it got over the various scandals that brought Gianni Infantino into office, that took down Sepp Blatter's regime and elbowed aside his anointed successor, Michel Platini, the man that was meant to succeed Blatter, and opened the door for Infantino, who was European football's choice. If they couldn't have Platini, who was the boss of UEFA, we'll have his number two. His slightly grey, at the time, unheralded right-hand man, a lawyer by trade, but a kind of career football administrator. We'll have him, and he was seen as to be the better option than his main candidate, who was proposed by the Asian Football Confederation from Bahrain, and a more controversial choice, certainly in European football circles. So they went with the UEFA man. Now that was that 2015, 2016. He's now doing his second term. He served the tail end of one term. He's now got his own term. The thing about Infantino, which I think has surprised everybody, most notably UEFA, who put him there, is that when you go to FIFA, you become a FIFA man. You change. You change. You stop thinking about European football and the European clubs and the big member associations here, the FA, the German, the DFB, the French FA, French Football Federation. You stop thinking about them. You start thinking about your electorate. Your electorate is the rest of the world. It's one man, one country, one vote. The smallest Pacific island is as powerful as Germany or Brazil or England. It's a different level of politics. You are dealing with different problems. You are dealing with, in football sporting terms, third world countries, and how you democratize that, and how you promote football, how you grow football. He's thinking in terms of breaking the game, really breaking the game in the three big countries where it isn't number one: China, India, and the US. He just has a different set of agendas. So you change when you go to FIFA. And this is sort of a kind of kind. Well, this is not kind, but I think that's fair. The bigger, I guess, question around Infantino himself is he made an awful lot of noise and big promises about cleaning up when he got there. This was different. New FIFA. I went to several of those early meetings, those big congresses, where he assured everybody there'll be no more dawn raids, there'll be no more mass arrests. We're cooperating now. We're the wrong party. FIFA are the ones that have been defrauded. We're not the mafia. We've been defrauded by gangsters. Those guys are going to be punished. The American authorities are leading the charge there. We're helping them. If the European authorities want to start investigating, we'll help them too. But trust me, that will never happen again. We're going to be much more transparent about what we do. And we're also going to, and this is where Infantino sort of has upset many people, instead of, let's say, just kind of concentrating on that and really, really focusing on that and making meaningful change, which will take a long time. It's cultural, it's institutional, it's to do with the way the world works. It cannot all be on one man's shoulders. But instead of focusing on that, he's tinkered with the game. He's aggressively tried to grow FIFA's revenues. Which has upset UEFA, which has upset CONMEBOL, which is the UEFA equivalent in South America, the two big established powers, by increasing the size of the World Cup, by trying to revamp the Club World Cup, which would automatically be a threat to the Champions League, those are the sort of two main things. And of course, he inherited a couple of tricky decisions. He inherited the Russian World Cup, which brought some ethical issues, but still brings ethical issues, but was a success, was a financial and sporting success. And he's, of course, inherited Qatar, the Qatar World Cup, which, we will see. That wasn't his choice. He's inherited it. He's committed to it, wholeheartedly committed to it. It's a very mixed bag. He has grown FIFA's revenues. He has massively fallen out with UEFA, European football. Is FIFA less corrupt, cleaner, tighter than it used to be? Well, that's again a matter of opinion. There are lots of people around the world who say no, African football is a complete mess. FIFA's had to almost take over African football, which has led to lots of people talking about colonization again. And, what are you doing for African football? There are issues in it's sort of been accused. It's just lost a lawsuit involving the Trinidad and Tobago FA, where it looks like the FIFA, have been bullying a very small member state. There's a horrible scandal going in Haiti around abuse again, a really awful story to do with the FA there around sexual abuse. There's a bad issue in Afghanistan, similar story. That they are not all on FIFA. Those are to do with FIFA's members, but FIFA has struggled to get past this perception of just a not a very well run mess. This Swiss situation is embarrassing for him personally in his own country. He's a Swiss Italian, speaks lots of languages fluently, is a very competent public speaker, but he can at times look like he's winging it. He's more style than substance. Does he deliver on his big rhetoric, and his big promises, and are some of the ideas he pursues, whose benefit are they? Is it for the greater good of the game, or is it for the greater good of the FIFA president and to secure his power base and to get elected again? There are many questions. He has. It's a mixed bag, and he divides people. I think that's probably the fairest thing to say about him.
Great. Thank you so much for all your thorough answers. Really appreciate your time. I know that you're really busy with all the stories going on, and I'm hoping, this 1 hour, I really enjoyed it. You don't know how much, but I'm hoping that we can get you back on our pod again.
Sure, just ask.
Sure, right. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
And you, take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.